Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk. Hi.
Hello.
That's my chair squeaks. I really need to oil that puppy. Every time I move it. Oh.
Well, between me umming and lip smacking, I don't... So, this is what you don't all realize. Actually, I found out that Joe did know this. Because he is my husband and he knows my speech patterns. When he listens to the podcast, he's like, wow, Shannon does a really great job editing. Because he knows where I have different sounds that are not words coming out of my mouth. So when we were in Vegas, we recorded there. You've already heard those. But, Shannon was editing one of the podcasts to go out. And I sat down next to her to see how she was doing it. And after about 3 minutes maybe, I turned to her and said, I'm a fucking idiot. She looked at me very surprised and said, why do you say that? I said, because I didn't think I had verbal tics, and all I do is say, and smack my mouth.
Is it the pattern? Smack, so.
We both say so.
But that's good. The only reason I don't is because I listened, in the beginning, I heard all my things, and then I just hated them so much, and I was like, okay, you can't do that anymore. So I may slip out and then sometimes I leave it. If I've had to leave one of yours because, the words, it was too interlaced with something, then I leave it. And then I was like, so I'll leave one from me and then I way overthink this shit. But yeah, once you're editing it, and then that's why when we were there listening to the speakers at the thing, the one woman, she was giving great information, but she ummed so much. And by the end, I was stabby. Like I just wanted to stab her in the face. I just can't take it anymore because I'll sit there and listen. If I do 2 in a row, that's like 4 hours of sitting there listening to stuff over and backing it up, and I just can't do it anymore.
And that was also the episode where after we did the sign off, we just babbled. We kept talking and just random meandering conversation.
We do. I think I'm one of the one that I posted this past week. I had to cut out so much. I was like, shut the hell up, us.
And you looked at me and you said, I am cutting this. And I said, please do.
Please do it. I cut it all. We did like a whole conversation about giving birth and pregnancy when we were in Vegas. And I cut all that out.
Okay, that's fair.
I said, nobody wants to. You know what? Maybe some women are like, yeah, I want to talk about this. I want to hear about it, but no.
If you want to hear about our childbirth experiences, reach out. We would be happy to share them with you. However, we're not going to subject the general public to them.
Yeah, because I was part of a mom's board, and after each person gave birth, we will all do in March.
Oh.
And then the earliest, I think, was born maybe around Valentine. No, he was born in January. He was premature. The first one to be born in our March board was born in January. Anyway, each person had their baby, and then we each wrote up our birth story and post, and I'm like, oi. Women.
You can strike up a conversation with any woman who has given birth.
But I mean, it is a big deal when we're going through. Oh, my son came home from school, and he was like, which one of our births do you remember the most? And I said, I remember them both vividly in complete 100% detail and equally. And he was like, okay. Because I was taught one of his male teachers was talking about something, and he said, I only really remember the first child's birth, and then I don't remember anything after that. I don't remember the other ones. There were just more of them. And I said, that's because the baby wasn't coming out of his body. So he's like, I'm going to go out stab. And he goes downstairs and he asks Jeff, and Jeff says, I guess I slightly remember the first one more because it was like the first one we did. And he was like, but I remember them both. So there you go. But I thought that was funny. He was like, he doesn't remember any of the other ones at all. And I'm like, I'm sure he remembers something from them, but who knows? I don't know how many kids he had. Maybe he had like 8, and he's like, I don't know. They blend together.
That could be.
Now you have to ask Joe.
I will ask Joe, which birth do you remember the most?
Or are they about equal?
Because he had a completely different point of view, obviously, than I did.
Yes. So
all,
there you go.
all I remember is after Nikki was born, I did offer to perform the vasectomy.
We can take care of this right now, honey.
Yep.
All right. See, that's all we're going to talk about birthing this time.
Yep.
You're welcome.
Let's talk about fragile egos instead.
Oh, we could so easily.
But no.
No. Have you been watching Wednesday at all?
Yes, I finished it.
Oh, I'm not finished yet, but I've been watching.
Have you seen her dance yet?
Yes, we just watched that one. So that's the last one we watched.
I think you only have 1 or 2 more to go.
Okay. Yeah.
That dance was magnificent.
And it's kind of like an Easter egg to actually the original TV show, and a dance
yes.
Wednesday has aged more each iteration, right? Because Christina
Yes.
Ricci was actually pretty young when she was doing, hers is still my favorite. I think
Yes.
what is her name? Jenna Ortega or
something like that.
I think she's doing a good job. She lost me a little in the very first episode when she smiled. She smiles within the first 10 minutes, and I was like, that's not. But of course, she needs to make it her own character, and I totally get that, folks. It's just that for me, Christina Ricci will always be, because she invented that character versus the TV show, which I had grown up watching, which was just, she was good too, but she was just a little girl. And
yes,
Christina Ricci made it, and she made those movies.
Well, I didn't like, at the very beginning of the new series, I didn't like how they made her such a bratty teenager who hated her parents just for the sake of hating her parents.
Yeah.
That felt artificial because the way Christina Ricci, those 2 movies portrayed the family, it was a very loving, supportive, close-knit family. And I said, well, I get the whole people go through puberty and everything goes to shit, but
I agree, because that one of the big draws of the Addams Family, it's dark and it's funny of the movies, we'll say. And yet the movies and the TV, they all were very loving. It was just like you said, a close-knit, loving, affectionate, even in their dark way. But I mean, the Morticia and Gomez are extremely lovey-dovey. Mm-hmm. And in this, so I hate this. I love, oh shit, his name just popped out of my head. I love the guy playing Gomez. And new guy.
Guzman.
Luis Guzman. And I don't like Catherine Zeta-Jones just fine. I think she's stunning, but I didn't like her Morticia. And I didn't like them grossly making out in the car, because they were never gross about it.
No.
When it was in either of the other things, it was the kissing up the arm in the TV show. Mm-hmm. And yes, affection, but they didn't, there was like a gross making out thing with their kids in the car.
I agree. The other thing because I was watching it with Thing One, Lucy, and we watched it, binged the whole thing over Thanksgiving break. I said, it's hard for me to adjust to Catherine Zeta-Jones, who's a beautiful woman and a very good actress.
She doesn't have what Angelica Houston has, though.
Angelica Houston had sort of a regal air, and she also was a very slender build. Mm-hmm. It's a difference when you have that long, tall, slender look in your head, and then Catherine Zeta-Jones is very voluptuous.
Yeah.
So that's a very different look. It wasn't wrong
compared
or bad.
to the cartoon, because that's been the defense of Luis Guzman, and I didn't have a problem with his Gomez. Again, Raul Julia will always. Yes. And I loved John Astin too, but Raul Julia they were so good. They were just so good in those movies. It was perfection.
They were.
And that's the problem. But he matches the cartoon better, the original cartoon by Charles Addams.
Yes.
In look, and then she actually is less that look than the other 2 were.
I couldn't believe who they had play Uncle Fester. He was a little different.
Yeah, that guy freaks me out. And I read trivia on him lately because it was about Saturday Night Live alums that he's like a terrible person. And so I felt better, because every time I look at him, I think psychopath. Like, there's something about his eyes, and I look at him and I'm like, he's disturbing, but he does a good job and stuff, right? But I can't watch him and stuff. It drives me nuts. And so, yeah, like, I haven't gotten to Fester yet.
It's not huge. I think...
I mean, he's probably perfect for it because he's weird and crazy.
I think he's only in one episode. It might be 2.
Okay.
But mostly 1. You'll probably see him in the next episode.
I think so. Because she brought him up in this last one. But yeah, other than that, I love that they're doing little Easter eggs to the previous iterations.
Yes.
I love that Christina Ricci's in it.
I could not recognize her. I sat there looking at that actress going, who is that? And I'm thinking to myself, I got to get on Google and go to IMDb.
Oh, no, really?
Didn't recognize her because she had that. I'm used to her having an edge.
Yeah.
In whatever role she plays, she kind of has an edge. And she was all sweetness and light and bumbling and
redhead.
and redhead. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I watch it every year. We won't talk about that because God knows I'll get attacked over it. But I watch Addams Family Values every year. And I've always been a Christina Ricci fan. So
yes.
that I saw her the second she was in it. And I was like, yay!
Totally did not recognize her. Oh. And I did have to Google because when Wednesday is standing next to the woman playing the principal, there's such a height differential.
Oh my God, yes.
And I thought to myself, are they doing this on purpose? Is she standing on a box? Is she?
Oh no, she's that tall.
She's 6'3".
Did you watch Game of Thrones?
No, I did not.
That's why.
So yeah, that woman is 6'3", and the woman who plays Wednesday Addams is 5'1". So there is a 14-inch difference in their heights.
Oh yeah, she's the woman playing the principal is amazing. Like she's stunning.
She is stunning, and she was so very good. Because of her mannerisms.
Yes.
The model.
And it's for those of us who did watch Game of Thrones, she's a very, I don't know that I'd say butch, but I mean, she does have a kind of more masculine, she's a fighter. She's a warrior in it. And she's not meant to be attractive in it. And I mean, you can only do so much to take that away from somebody. So it's not like she's unattractive. But this is the first thing that those of us who watch Game of Thrones have really seen her be like makeup, first of all.
Yes.
And nice clothes and nice hair and stuff. And so, yeah, that's been fun. But she's a great character, too. Enjoying it. Okay, but we can start.
Yes. So you leap in.
Do you enjoy going to the grocery store? If so, this message is not for you. But if you're like me and procrastinate going to the store, Instacart is a fantastic option to ensure you no longer have to. Save yourself a trip and go through Instacart, where you can get a delivery through a personal shopper in as little as 1 hour. My experiences have been great so far, with my personal shopper texting me before substituting another product, letting me know when they were on their way to my house, and letting me know it had been delivered, all via text. If you click on our affiliate link in the show notes or on our website, you get free delivery on your first order over $35, and you help out our show at the same time. It's the perfect time to give it a try. I'm going to go first, and I will say, I will give a warning.
I thought that whole thing was that I was like, how many pages is it?
I'm going to talk for 2 hours.
All right.
I could.
Yes.
It's a popular enough one. I could. But anyway, the trigger warning, basically, this does involve sexual assault. I don't go into details about that. So I'll put that out there right now. And I think you'll recognize this as soon as I get to the name.
Yes.
But this is about the killer clown. So some of you already know who this is. In March 1977, a 27-year-old man named Jeff Rignall went to the police, stating a man had offered him marijuana, but when he got into the car, that man had used chloroform on a rag to knock him out. He woke up at the man's house, handcuffed, and was sexually assaulted, then let go. This man was John Wayne Gacy, a well-known, upstanding citizen of the community who was party leader for the local Democrats and often dressed as a clown he called Pogo. At children's hospitals, he sometimes used patches instead, but he was well known for going around and doing these shows. He would later be quoted as saying that he was free when dressed as a clown to do things he couldn't normally do. He said clowns can get away with anything. Clowns can get away with murder. Born in March 1942 in Chicago, his father was an abusive alcoholic. Gacy quit school before finishing, but eventually opened his own business and became known as a successful businessman. At one point in the 70s, he was photographed with Rosalind Carter.
Wow.
Jimmy Carter's wife, for anybody who doesn't know. Police pressed charges of battery, which was just a misdemeanor charge. Rignall also brought a civil suit against him and won $3,000. And I don't think I don't know if he was actually like convicted of that misdemeanor. Either way, it wasn't a big deal. He was out $3,000. December 31st, 1977, Chicago police arrested Gacy based on a claim by a 19-year-old male that Gacy had held a gun on him, kidnapped him, and forced him into sexual acts. When they approached Gacy, he admitted to having sexual relations with him, but said the teen had been actively engaged, despite the acts being violent. The assistant state's attorney decided not to press charges, saying it was a he said situation. Then on December 11th, 1978, a 15-year-old honor student named Robert Piest, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, disappeared after getting off work. His mom showed up to pick him up at 9 p.m. at the end of his shift, but he asked for some more time because he was meeting a man about a possible construction job that would pay almost twice what his pharmacy job did. His mom waited outside, but her son never came out. So she went home to get the rest of the family, including their German shepherds, and they all returned to search for Robert. When they had no luck, she reported him missing at the Des Plaines PD at 11:29 p.m. that night. As he was a good student and not known to be troubled, and because he disappeared with his mom right there, police did accept the report. There was no 24-hour blah, blah, blah.
Right.
In addition, a Lieutenant Kozenchak, whose son went to school with Robert, launched a real investigation. He really pushed, and he was like, we need to look into this. Because there were other missing boys, you know. Mm. But a lot of them were street kids or kids that got into trouble. And he discovered that a company called PDM Contractors had done a recent remodel at the pharmacy, and that the owner, John Wayne Gacy, was the person Robert was supposed to meet. Kozenchak asked Gacy to come in and speak with him, to which he agreed, but then he never showed up. So Kozenchak waited until 1 a.m. and then went home. The next day, he discovered that Gacy had gotten stuck in a snowbank that night at 2 a.m. and had to get a tow. And this snowbank was miles away from town. Lo and behold, Gacy walked in at 3:20 a.m. covered in mud and asked to speak to Kozenchak. They sent him away and told him to come back because they're like, he's not here anymore, yo. Like, he waited for you forever. And when he did, Kozenchak was waiting with a warrant for Gacy's home and belongings. Gacy was forced to hand over his keys, and he did so, but he wasn't happy about it. He protested and you know, hemmed and hawed, but they got it. The search did produce a receipt for film developing that belonged to Robert, and they took some other suspicious items. There's a whole list. Plus, they took all his vehicles to be searched more in depth. With nothing to hold him on, they had to release him that night at 11 p.m. One of the other items they'd found at his home was a school ring for a Maine high school. Authorities were able to link the ring to a young man who had disappeared 2 years before. It was December 15 when this was put together. One of Gacy's employees at his contracting business came forward to say 2 of his fellow employees had disappeared recently, and they were young. They were teenage males. On December 19th, Gacy invited police in for breakfast, which is so great. He was like, come on in. But they came in and it smelled like they could smell the scent of death. And this is a scent that cops, once you've smelled it, you don't ever forget what that smell is.
Yeah.
Gacy was living alone at the time after a second divorce. I've purposely not brought his wives into this because they had no idea. In response, Gacy filed a civil suit against the police department for harassment and illegal search and seizure. It went nowhere. They had a warrant when they went in there, and he invited them in this time, so... Prior to all this, police had previously staked out Gacy's home and seen a lot of young males coming and going. They'd been alerted in 1975, so that's about 2 years before what we're talking about now, to a man calling himself only John, who was driving his Oldsmobile around and trying to get young boys into his car. The ways in which he did this varied, from offering them pot to a possible job. It would later be discovered that Gacy had in his possession a police light, siren, and a badge, which also might explain how he so easily got some of these males in his car. During the stakeout, the police questioned several of the males as they exited the house, but none of them had any helpful information, and they had not been assaulted, or they weren't going to admit it. By this point, Gacy had created kind of a den of iniquity in his home where he invited teen boys over, gave them alcohol, and played porn movies for them. He started offering some of the boys money to do sexual favors. And for somebody living on the street, usually it was like $50. That can get you a lot.
Yeah.
Especially in the 70s.
Yeah.
Some of these boys had been cast out by their families. Some worked in the sex trade, but some were employees, and even the kids of some of the men he knew. He was a member of the JCs. Oh. And at least one, this man was supposed to be his friend. He went after at least one son of one of those guys. In 1976, Chicago police had also run a not entirely above-board bout of surveillance on the house. It was out of their jurisdiction. But they weren't able to find any evidence. they were just watching. And again, it's just boys coming and going. And he must have been aware when they were out there or something. I didn't say that, but easy enough for the boys to leave and not be killed at that time. Back to 1978. Police also discovered that he had been convicted in Waterloo, Iowa for sodomy of a teenage boy in 1968. One boy he attacked told, but sometime later, Gacy hired another young man to attack him. At some point, the victim got the upper hand and broke the other boy's nose, escaping the beating. Gacy's sentence at the time was 10 years in prison, but he was released after less than 2 years and allowed to leave the state to finish out his parole in Chicago. They didn't care.
No.
They probably assumed the boy was gay and it was another one of those.
Or out of sight, out of mind. Let's get him out of our neighborhood.
Yeah, let's send him back and then we don't have to deal with him anymore. That's great. Things really started to break on December 21st, 1978. Police were actively surveilling Gacy, certain that he had Robert Piest holed up somewhere in his house and that he was responsible for a missing 9-year-old. They caught him giving a package of marijuana to a gas station attendant and arrested him for that because they figured, all right, we can at least get him on drug charges. They once more got a warrant for his home and went in for a more detailed search. Gacy told them that he had killed a man in self-defense and buried him under the garage. So they took him back to his house and they allowed him to use spray paint to mark where this man was buried so that they could go under there. Searching further, they found a crawl space under his house and immediately found body parts for at least 3 individuals.
Ugh.
And of course, this is where the stench was coming from. His last wife had actually complained about the smell, and he kept saying it's rodents caught in the walls or whatever. Oh, it's just, another rat dead in the wall. And yeah.
Yeah.
His first wife had left him when he got arrested for that 1968 crime. So, and he had 2 kids with her. The second wife, they never had kids. Yeah. Well, when she left him, he said he never wanted to talk to her or them again. And so again, I'm not giving out names. I'm not putting that on them. Gacy broke then and confessed in third person. Well, he said he kept using John or Jack. Jack did this. John did this. What that means on December 22nd, 1978, to murdering at least 32 men and having sex with them. He claimed there were 27 people buried on his property and that he dumped 5 others in rivers. He was only able to tell them 6 of the victims' names. That's how little regard he had for them. Some of these killers remember every single name and where they picked them up, or they remember most of them or they details. And he was just like, I don't know. At that time, the PD started excavating his property, and they ended up finding 29 bodies buried. Most of those were in the crawl space, and then there was more than one under in the garage where the one person was. They ended up finding at least one other, and then there were a couple outside. So I don't know what order he did those in. Yeah, so 29 bodies buried, and there were 4 more that they ended up finding in waterways. So there's 1 unaccounted for since he said 5. And that included Piest, whose death they had already charged him with, despite there not being a body at that time. He wouldn't be found until April 1979 when his identity was confirmed via x-rays, and he was in the waterways.
Okay.
Yeah. It was finally pieced together that the night he skipped that police interview, he had run home, grabbed Robert's body, which was actually upstairs, I think in his bedroom or something like that. And then he'd driven the body out and dumped it in the river and then caught in that snowbank. Mm-hmm. Yes. His crawl space had gotten too full, so he'd switched then to tossing them in waterways. It's so gross.
I mean, your crawl space is too full of bodies.
Yes.
To fit anymore.
Yes. And I'm sure the details out there somewhere. How did he have people, when did he report inside his garage? I assume even in the 70s it was a concrete flooring. So he had to have gotten it. He had a construction company then. He probably just did it himself.
Oh, probably.
Yeah, okay. As the police continued searching for bodies through mid-1979, relatives from around the world were contacting them about their missing boys. One person contacted them from London.
Oh.
It helped identify some of the victims. However, police stated that they would expect more people to be contacting them and speculated that families were avoiding this due to, quote, gay overtones in the crimes. Mm-hmm. They thought that they were just like, oh, well, if my son was, and assuming it shouldn't matter either way. To be very clear. But just because they got snared, but he was offering jobs. He was offering this and that. Mm-hmm. So, anyway. It's upset. It's upsetting.
It is. It's very upsetting.
And actually, the police were upset, but they were like, claim your kids. Like,
but didn't you say that some of them, they thought some of them were street kids?
Yes, and some of them had been cast out by their parents because they were gay. And,
right.
Yeah.
So they may have separated contact from their families prior to this.
Yeah. Police couldn't press charges until they had some identified bodies, and so they kept pushing for relatives to contact them to help make the identifications, and they really were dismayed at the lack of response. They said less than 24 people contacted them through this, and there are thousands upon thousands of missing boys at any given time. By that time, Gacy had stopped discussing the crime with police at all. He wasn't answering questions anymore. I mean, he'd poured it out in his third person or whatever, but nope, he was done. So he left them to find the bodies and to find the identities and stuff. There was some evidence in the house. He'd kept a couple IDs. He'd kept this or that. And so that helped too. It was established that victims had been suffocated, asphyxiated, stabbed, or garroted, or a combination. Some were found with men's bikini underwear shoved in their mouths. I just found, I don't know, just so offensive that you have to degrade somebody. But, you know, it adds to it. Some still had belts tied around their necks, so it was clear that's how they die, you know. It's established by living males who were assaulted but lived that his MO was telling them he would do a magic trick. And he was a clown. They knew he was a clown. The whole community knew him. So they'd allow him to handcuff them. And that's how he got them. That's how he got control of these young men who might have otherwise been able to overpower him. They were handcuffed. And then he would do as he pleased. He'd threaten them. And, you know, you have to perform. And then, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People will do a lot of things to try and live.
Oh, yeah.
Survival is... That's in our reptile brains, you know. So, victims found by January 1979 were John Chick, 19, Gregory Godzik, 17, Frank Landingen, who had been found in November 1978 but hadn't been identified then, John Butkovich, 18, who was one of his missing employees. His parents said he'd gone to Gacy's house to get money owed him because what Gacy would do if he was short on money or whatever is he just wouldn't pay his employees. He'd keep the money. And this young man was like, no, you owe me 2 weeks' pay. And this is what he got for that. James Mazzara, 20. And Rick Johnson, 17. Those are the ones found so far. With these victims identified, it was felt there was enough to press charges for those victims. On January 8th, 1979, he was charged with 7 murders, plus aggravated kidnapping, deviant sexual assault, and taking indecent liberties with a child. Gacy pled not guilty.
Of course he did.
Right. After the charges were levied, more victims were identified. Police were still working through this. They wanted to find... a lot of them, they were interviewing these cops, and they were like, everybody deserves to know what happened to their family members. You know, these boys deserve for people to know what happened to them. So they tried creating a database of thousands of males reported missing in the area so that there was a way to kind of cross-reference. And in addition, a hotline was created for runaways so that they could report in and say they were okay so that parents could find out if their kids were at least alive. I mean, I feel like they did a lot to try.
Yeah.
I think they were horrifying. Once you walk into a basement full of 20 some odd bodies and have to pull those bodies out, you're never going to be right, first of all.
No.
The first
crawl space.
Nobody likes those anyway.
No, but you can't stand up. It's not like they were standing and shining a flashlight about. They were probably crawling.
I hate crawl spaces. So I hate them. There's a lot around this area. Well, not this one that we live in now because these are newer. But when we first moved here in the early 90s, late 80s, there were a lot of houses in the communities had crawl spaces, or they'd have the door in the wall and it was just dirt behind the wall. Yeah, very common here.
No, I don't like.
I had never seen a crawl space before that. Not in Oregon and not in Maryland. The first to be identified after the charges had been levied was Timothy O'Rourke, found in the Illinois River. The next identified victims were John Mowry, 19, whose sister sadly had been murdered 6 years before his disappearance, and her murder had never been solved.
Oh, Jesus.
Matthew Bowman, 18, William Carroll, 16, and Randall Ruffett, 15. I just like that family. Can you imagine?
No.
2 of your children being murdered in separate incidents? It sucks. April 10th, 1979, the county had Gacy's house demolished.
Good.
Yeah. And so there was just this empty lot right here. April 23rd, 1979, the newly identified victims are added to the 7 already charged, making a total of 33 indictments, which set a record at that time. They talk about all these killers, and some of them it's, when you actually look into it, it's 4 or 5 bodies, and you're kind of surprised because it seemed bigger, but he actually had a high proven body count.
Mm-hmm.
In July 1979, police released descriptions of evidence items taken in, hoping those would get somebody to come forward. And I decided not to list those. More bodies were found. William Kindred, 19, Tommy Bowling Jr., 20 years old, and a father who had fallen into drug use, Robert Winch, 16, Samuel Stapleton, 14, and David Talsma, 19. Gacy's attorneys tried to get him moved to a different venue due to bias, but the judge decided, and this is interesting, that they would find a jury in a neighboring county so that they weren't biased, and sequester that jury through the trial so that it was fair, but it saved money instead of having to go, because then you'd have to get all new everything if you moved the area. So in that way, he honored the request, but he didn't cost all that money and have all the moving and have that delay that it otherwise would have caused. Knowing the evidence and testimony would be disturbing, the judge also banned those under 16 from the courtroom. Of course, Gacy's lawyers went for the insanity plea.
What else could they have done?
Right?
I mean, really, what else could they have done?
And the thing is, he had already been looked at for that, because when previous accusations were made, and he had already had his mental health evaluated through the court then, and had been shown to be quite sane. He was a successful businessman.
Yes.
You can't break that. You can't say that he's not mentally incompetent to stand trial if he can be a successful businessman.
He's mentally competent 9 to 5.
Yes.
And mentally incompetent in his off hours.
That's right. The death penalty, which there was the electric chair, was on the table. Testimony lasted 5 weeks. Gacy was found guilty by the jury in less than 2 hours. Not only was he found guilty, but he was given the death penalty. Despite the sentence levied against him, police were not ready to give up on identifying the remaining bodies. Now, a lot of places, because of money and stuff like that, at that point they have to be like, it's done, he's convicted, there's nothing more we can do. But they were not willing to stop, and they haven't been. Because you'll see there's some recent identifications, and that's why I wanted to do this story, because to get those victims' names out there, basically, because they'd finally been identified. In 1980, there were 2 more victims identified, Michael Marino, 14, and Kenneth Parker, 16, who were buried together and were friends. In real life, so it's thought that they were victimized together. Then came the identification of Daryl Sampson, 19. On July 14th, 1980, the Cook County Chief Medical Examiner Robert Stein worked with a facial reconstructionist named Betty Pat Gatliff to create models of the 9 still unidentified victims. Stein made a public statement asking families who were reluctant to come forward to move past their issues with possible homosexuality, saying, quote, "There is no evidence that an individual child here participated in any sexually deviant practices. My plea would be a very simple one. Are you parents or aren't you parents? Do you have a son or don't you have a son?" Because sometimes parents suck.
Yep. Are you parents or are you not?
I thought that was pretty powerful statement for him to put out there. Do you have a son or don't you have a son? You assholes. You raging fucking assholes. Yep. And a lot of these, it's siblings that came forward to identify them, not their parents. Because some people do not suck, the remaining 9 young men were laid to rest June 12th, 1981, in donated caskets with yellow wreaths. So a short service is given for each one, each getting a marker that said, "We remembered." Again, that's not stuff that they normally do.
No.
Gary's first established victim was found in May 1986. Timothy Jack McCoy had been killed in 1972 while on a break walking around his Greyhound bus in Chicago. So I'm wondering if that, because he was on a trip, was a cop approach. Because how do you lure somebody who's on an ongoing trip to go somewhere? So during this time, Gacy's property had sat empty. Again, just a dirt lot. But it was eventually bought, and construction on a new home began on June 15th, 1988. A lot of people were indignant about that. They thought it should become a park or a monument instead. Mm-hmm. But nope, it was a house. Which I guess
I wouldn't
makes
want to
it
live
easier.
There. No. Who the fuck would buy that house? Or build that house. Cold-hearted.
I'd be like, could we do some ground-penetrating radar before you come in here?
No.
Gacy, while in prison, became well known for creating a lot of art. He's very famous for this. We've all seen his art. Some of it was Disney stuff. Some of it was clowns. Some of it's like landscapes. And some of that was sold at state fairs through the prison. And along with other prisoners' artwork, it wasn't just his. And they used that money to then buy art supplies for the prisoners. So it went back into that. It didn't go to the individuals. Eventually, his appeals all failed, and at 12:58 a.m. on May 10th, 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injection, even though it had been the electric chair on the when they were going through it.
It's too bad it couldn't have been a faulty electric chair.
I know.
So it was long and drawn out.
Yeah, one of those ones where they forget the sponge or something. It was at Stateville Correctional Center. His last words were, "Kiss my ass."
Isn't he just a special
He's a
snowflake?
peach. On May 14th, 1994, two businessmen purchased a lot of Gacy's art. And I mean by an auction lot, not a whole lot of it. They purchased a lot. And it might have been a couple lots from the sound of it. I think they spent about $20,000 ultimately. The exact amount wasn't given.
Why?
But
okay.
Then they gave the art to family members of the victims, and a bonfire was held outside so these businessmen spent all that money to give the victims' families closure. So people were weirdly like good people around this. Isn't that weird?
Yes.
Because again, not usually like this. But yeah, and there's images of some of the family members throwing the art into the bonfire. I thought that was pretty cool. And the money then went to the private sellers, some of it, and the rest was given to the families of the victims. So
nice.
Pretty solid. Those people got reimbursed for what they'd spent for it in the first place. And so there we go. We'll leave it at that. That's positive. The story's not over quite yet. Oh. So again, the whole reason it's okay. The whole reason I did this is because I saw another victim had been identified fairly recently. Cook County exhumed the bodies of the 8 remaining unknown victims to extract DNA. Again, still trying to figure out who these boys were. They asked that the families of males who'd gone missing between 1970 and 1978 come forward to give samples. Sure enough, more were identified over the next few years. Right away, a match was found for 19-year-old William George Bundy, an unfortunate last name, considering what we're talking about. In his case, it wasn't that the family was biased, but that when they'd originally tried to provide the dental records in 1979 when they were first asking, his mom discovered that the dentist had not only retired, but had destroyed all his records. And that made me think, like, they can do that. And we've dealt with doctors who had all their records in a storage room when we were trying to get stuff for legal purposes. Right. And like one of them here was like, the storage room is in a whole different state. I can't go there to get it. And he just kept bucking us, right? Until lawyers they start with with legal requests, yes, but they can't force them to get the things. And then they have to decide if it's important enough to go and get the actual work instead. So just so people know, they don't subpoena first. The number of people that we were collecting records for at any given moment, it would have been an insane amount of subpoenas. And most of the medical professionals get that to you. But certain groups of them do not. Psychiatrists / psychologists were some of the hardest to get it from. And chiropractors were really hard.
And tracking down the right person to ask at a school.
Yeah, because oh my God.
Generally, when we were reaching out to a school, all we were trying to ascertain or verify was the dates the student attended. That was it. And you're going to have to talk to Betty in the other building. And she's over in the blue building.
Like, I'm not there.
That was my thing. I don't know Betty. I don't know what fucking building you're talking about.
I'm calling from Colorado and you're in Illinois. Yeah, so that was always fun.
Yes.
Ugh. Some of them were awful. Anyway, so once DNA became an option, they were all too eager to get over there, and so that is how their son got confirmed. Detective Sergeant Jason Moran continued trying to identify the male victims of Gacy, and during this time, he was actually able to solve 11 other missing persons cases that had nothing to do with Gacy by going through these processes. They were able to say, oh my gosh, you're related to this body that we found. And he was quoted as saying, You've got these young kids who struggle through their short lives. I want them to have some dignity and respect so the world knows they once lived. Again, what is it with like the people on this case? I was like, I've heard this story a billion times, but this is the first time I've seen all these positive things about it. July 19th, 2017, another identification was made. Jimmy Hawkinson was only 16 when he was killed. His parents had also come out in 1979 to see if their son was one of the victims, but did not have dental records for him once again. And that was all they were using then. There were a couple then that were identified with x-rays, but those x-rays often ended up involving the teeth. And one of them, it involved like a previous break and stuff like that they were able to identify, but mostly it was dental records. October 25th, 2021. That's when I wanted to do this, and it's taken me this long. So that's where we get to that story. Francis Wayne Alexander was identified, leaving only 5 victims who are still unknown. That's pretty impressive considering how many bodies there were and the situation surrounding it and families who are a bunch of bigoted dickbags. And of course, some of them maybe didn't see it,
Yes.
Who knows? Alexander's victorious find came from a teaming up between the sheriff's department and the DNA Doe Project, which led to a genetic link to his brother and mother, who provided additional DNA for an official comparison. To end on a positive note, the hunt for the identities of Gacy's victims also reunited some families where the men were alive and didn't know their families were looking for them, that sort of thing.
Oh, wow.
And that was through DNA searches, and they were able to be put in contact with their families again.
Nice.
They'd had no idea. No idea. So anyway, sources. I don't know how you have no idea that your family doesn't know where you are.
Yeah.
Or maybe they had no idea that their family gave a shit. Because maybe they left when they were young. Yeah.
That could be.
Sources. Chicago Tribune article by Corey Ramore. The Guardian, Murderpedia, and Investigation Discovery.
Well, you mentioned, it made me think when you said that the city had the house demolished.
Yes.
So that reminded me of a story that took place in upstate New York, and it was, I want to say, within the last decade. It is common. I don't believe it's just upstate New York. I think it's anywhere where you have large Amish populations. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of farm stands. It is fairly common for the kids to attend to the farm stand. Sometimes it's because the kids speak more English than the adults, depending. But it's not uncommon. So what happened was these 2 girls were working, these 2 little sisters were, and I want to say they were like 7 and 9. I mean, they were not very old, or 8 and 10, were working in their parents' farm stand and went missing. So I'm just going to bust into tears.
I guess it's that episode, huh?
It's just that day. So they were taken by a couple and held in their house, and terrible things were done to them. And at some point, the girls were able to escape, and they went to a neighbor's house and pounded on the door. And by some miracle, this neighbor did everything right. The dad didn't try to touch them. He didn't try to, and he got his wife to come in, and they were able to, and they called the police, and the people were arrested. I think they should have been publicly stoned to death. But, nobody asked me. And they were reunited with their parents. What happened later was the guy who lived next door to the house where the girls were held bought that property and burned the house down. A controlled burn. He let the officials know, and he let their families know. Nice. So that anybody who wanted to be there could be there. But I was like, yeah, you have to. How else can you...
Yeah.
Who wants to live in that?
And yet there are a ton of murder houses that are still... I just read...
That's true.
The book by Michelle McNamara, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which is about the Golden State Killer that she wrote. She died before he was caught.
Right.
And Paul Holes is taking her around in one section of this to the houses that still exist where all these crimes were perpetrated, and just showing, it's people live in these houses. So, yeah. I guess it would be a lot of houses being burned down, but yeah, I always like when there's decent people who do what they can to help in a bad situation like that. That took money for him to buy the neighboring property just to burn it down.
Yep. And
now he'd go fund me.
Well, part of it was people would drive by and gawk at the house.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a very populated area, but why?
They posted the new address online of that. They changed, they did with Amityville, where they changed the address of it. Mm-hmm. And so, but then if you change it and then you put it out there that this is still the Gacy murder house,
yep,
right? I mean, people are still going to drive by even though it's a different house.
I could not live there. It doesn't matter that it's new construction. Knowing how much blood seeped into the ground and how much negative energy had to be there.
It's a white people burial ground, and therefore it's haunted. Just saying.
Okay. I can't even keep my face straight for that.
You know the old tales of the white people burial ground.
That's true. That's true.
That's how you get poltergeists.
That's how you get roaches. So, all right. So I'm going to lighten things up.
We try our best.
We do. We try to balance these out. This is mayhem for the sake of mayhem. This is just the weirdest frickin' story. So this is about the assassination attempt on President Barack Obama in 2013.
That we're all going, what?
And you're all going, yeah, what? So I'm trying to remember who sent me this. Thing 2. Okay. She's like, have you heard about this? And I said, I have not. So I read it and it was a guy on TikTok and he goes through it just bing, 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 bing. And I could not write fast enough. So I had to leaped off of what he did and did the research. It's fucking crazy. So yes, nobody knows what I'm talking about. So picture it. Tupelo, Mississippi, April 2013. Secret Service and FBI are surrounding the house of Kevin Curtis. And everybody's like, who? Huh? Okay, so Kevin is an ex-janitor, a conspiracy theorist, and an Elvis impersonator.
Okay.
He's the owner of
But he is a conspiracy theorist too.
Yes.
Okay.
And he's the owner of a Chihuahua mix named Moo Cow. It plays into the story. Okay. On his way to the mailbox with Moo Cow.
Can you go, Moo Cow, here boy, Moo Cow.
The authorities launch the offensive and tackle him to the ground and take him into custody. And he was deeply concerned. Where is Moo Cow? Is Moo Cow safe? So he was interrogated for several hours, and he was deeply puzzled as he tried to figure out why.
He's like, what does this have to do with my missing dog?
Yeah, he can't figure out why he's in trouble, and they keep trying to get him to confess because they're not telling him why he's being held. You hurt so many people. That's what they're telling him, and he's just like, huh? How? So finally, wait for it. So they finally told him he'd hurt a lot of people. And he asked how, and they answered, it was the ricin poison on the letters that you sent. And his response was, I don't like rice.
Because he has no idea what the hell they're talking about.
And they're like, wait, what? And he said, you can search my house. I don't even have any rice. I can't stand the stuff. And at this point, that was when even the men in charge stopped and said, what the fuck? What the ever-loving fuck is going on here? Kevin, and I think it's pronounced ricin or that's how
I don't know. I always said ricin, but that doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah, ricin. Anyway. So, Kevin was accused of sending ricin-tainted letters to President Obama, U.S. Senator Roger Wicker, and a Mississippi judge. The letters referenced a conspiracy involving a black market service supplying body parts, which Curtis had talked about on his social media pages. So he had been periodically sending letters like this, very, very similar letters, to Wicker for approximately 10 years, since they had met at a party where Curtis was performing as an Elvis impersonator. Mm-hmm. So he'd met this guy, and now he's sending him these letters because he's a senator. He can help. Side note, he also performed as Conway Twitty, Prince, Roy Orbison and
Wait.
others.
Wait, how do you do Prince and Elvis?
I
Please tell me it's not blackface.
I do not know.
Like,
I do not know.
huh.
But and they're sprinkled throughout. I didn't get all the references, but there were references to other performers that and actually for a while he performed with his brother.
Uh-huh.
And they played as old Elvis and young Elvis. And
All
I'm
right.
like, why? But here's the thing, people hired him.
Yeah, clearly for a thing that a senator was at even.
Yes. So the judge that he sent this to, this cracked me up. She was 80 years old. Her name was Sadie Holland, and she was a Lee County Justice Court judge. When she received her threatening letter with an odd substance, she gave it the good old sniff test.
No.
She said it burned her nose a little. I think it was her son who said that. She gave it the good old sniff test. That's what a country woman does. I'm like, if you get something in the mail from someone you don't know and you don't know what the substance is, yeah, lick it. That's
that's the first thing you should do.
That's what I lick all of our mail. And this time of year, it's
they use the good sealant.
The Amazon packages. Spit all over them.
Ew.
So, back in 2007, Kevin Curtis's ex-wife had called the local police to report that he was delusional, he was anti-government, and he thought the government was spying on him with drones. So despite her phone call, the local police had no interaction with him before this arrest. Mm-hmm. So he was no kind of troublemaker. He
would just cray.
He was kind of cray. Actually, he was mentally ill.
Okay.
And because I think I mentioned it later, I can't remember. His family actually said at some point during this investigation, he's the greatest guy in the world when he's taking his meds. And if he's not taking his meds, he gets a lot of conspiracy theories. What happened was he had uncovered the conspiracy, just put that in quotes, when he worked for a local hospital from 1998 to 2000. So there were a couple of different stories. But apparently on a break and in search of a Dr. Pepper, he discovered, this is in quotes, he discovered a refrigerator full of dismembered body parts and organs wrapped in plastic in the morgue of the largest non-metropolitan healthcare organization in the United States of America. Okay, the important word in that sentence was morgue. I mean, what the hell do you think they keep in the morgue? Lettuce? I mean, yeah, it's the morgue refrigerator.
I found a body.
Body parts.
Sir. This is a morgue, sir.
Don't you think the refrigerators in hospitals are probably marked and people aren't stuffing Dr. Peppers in the...
I feel I could see a coroner being like, this isn't cold enough. I'm putting it in one of those because they're the coroner or whatever. Medical examiner.
He was working as a janitor, so yeah. He wrote articles. He wrote a lot of articles, and he wrote a book called Missing Pieces, and he tried to find a way to expose the conspiracy that he had imagined. In 2006, he came across a truther newsletter run by James Everett. I don't know how to pronounce this, and I know that when I wrote this, I looked it up, and now I can't remember. Mm-hmm. We're going to say Deutsch. It's Dutschke.
Oh. So Deutschke?
Deutschke.
But yeah, I don't know.
Well, anyway, newsletter run by James Everett. We're going to call it Deutschke.
Okay.
That claimed it would print just about any article. So Kevin emails Deutschke, who never emails him back. So he learns that Deutschke is working with his ex-wife, the same one who thought he was delusional. So he crashed a work function, one of her work functions. And I don't think by crash, I mean, he didn't like smash through the windows or anything, but he wasn't invited. But anyhow, he crashed a work function in order to confront Deutschke and call him a liar. I'm just going to pronounce this different every time I say it.
Every time, do it.
Oh, here's where I change it. Big D. Because first of all,
It's a lot it's weird to type, huh?
it's a fucker to type. There are too many consonants. So Big D tells Kevin that this is too crazy for even him to print. And he can't risk it because he's getting ready to run for the House of Representatives. Which he does because he truly, madly, deeply hates the man holding the office, although nobody knows why. He runs a terrible smear campaign and loses. Big D. So after his loss...
Big D with the little d.
Big D. Big D with the little d. After Big D loses, in a spectacular fashion, Kevin starts making fun of him on Facebook. Wow, what a timely article this is. Big D responds by starting a band in a genre he labels Funktronica.
Okay, all right.
Then he follows that up by being arrested for indecent exposure in front of children. Kevin makes fun of Big D for all of this all over Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
His music, his arrest, all of it. Big D, however, is resourceful. So he home manufactures some ricin, which is made from castor oil. I don't feel I'm giving away a big state secret there. It's pretty easy to find that out. He then writes the letters where he is espousing Kevin's crazy conspiracy theories using the language that Kevin has been using in his own posts, in his own mailings, in his book. So he mimics fairly successfully, apparently, Kevin, sprinkles them liberally with ricin after signing Kevin's name and sends them off in the mail. This brings us back to Kevin and Moo Cow trying to get the mail and instead ending up in federal custody. Just Kevin. Moo Cow ran for freedom.
As a cat would.
Yeah, as a dog would. If there's no eyeball to eat or poop to roll in, the dog's like, later. The federal authorities let Kevin go after a search of his home revealed absolutely no traces of the poison or any manner of making it, none of the components, nothing. However, it didn't take the authority. They asked him who would do this, and he said Big D. He named him. He said, this guy is my sworn arch enemy. And so the authorities tracked down Big D and determined that he was the actual letter sender. In May of 2014, he was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison to be followed by 5 years of supervised release. And that trial was trippy in its own way. After agreeing to plead guilty, when he got to court, Big D changed his mind and withdrew his guilty plea. Then he went on a 30-minute rant about Kevin Curtis. At one point, he compared him to Barney the dinosaur. He also offered to eat the letters to prove that they weren't poisoned.
Oh.
When he returned to court for sentencing, the judge asked him if he wanted to make a statement before sentencing. Big D replied, I think it would be best if I didn't. And then,
I agree.
And then he laughed.
Jeez.
So that is pure fucking mayhem over trivial shit. People get so
who
worked
knew
up.
that happened?
Who knew indeed? So the sources are a guy named Ryan Kelly on TikTok. He did the original video via Thing 2. WJLAnews.com and the Los Angeles Times.
All right.
So presumably Kevin Curtis is still doing his
Elvising and conspiracy theory.
presumably, and
he's definitely not getting rice.
Hope he's being medicated as he needs.
Yeah.
But like I said, the police were. I don't believe federal authorities are required to let the local police know when they're having an operation like this, but it's considered
polite.
Common courtesy to let them know. So can you imagine? Here all these federal people are coming in, we're going after this guy, and you're looking through your records going, but he doesn't even have a jaywalking ticket. We have one call complaining about him from his ex-wife.
Yeah.
Saying he thinks we're spying on him with drones. So, It was just so odd and such, again, mayhem for the sake of mayhem.
Yeah. All right. That's a good way to end it.
Yes.
Yes.
Mayhem for the sake of mayhem, which is much better than
what we're all about.
Although I could see monsters just for the sake of monsters. So.
Yeah. This works a lot of ways. So thank you for listening, as always. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yes, we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back next week with more shenanigans.